Longmeadow tree warden, and we're, trying to do a little bit more of some kind of outreach, education programming. So what better way to do that than plant a tree, which in of itself sounds like such a simple phrase and such a simple thing to do, but there's a lot of science behind it, and making sure we not only get the tree in the ground, but we make sure it's set up for success and not going to, keel over in a couple of years, where a tree is an investment, just like, a pet is an investment. You don't just get a hamster and go, okay, have fun, and let it figure itself out. My goal for today is to go through kind of the planting process, the proper methods, explaining some common mistakes or hiccups that people run into when they're planting. So we've got a nice, lovely location here. The first thing that I had done, doing some site assessment. So looking at the site, looking at what we're around. We're in a very high trafficked area for cars and for pedestrians. So you want to consider both of those things. The site's going to be very disturbed. It's going to get a lot of road salt. It's going to get a lot of pollution from the air. You might have kids coming and playing underneath it, catching some shade. So it's going to be a pretty compacted soil condition area as well. Tree species, you don't want to necessarily pick something that's not going to do so well with the road salt, or something that's going to, not be able to handle the tougher conditions. So the tree we got here is a London plane tree, which is relatively similar to a sycamore tree. They're within the same family. So this tree is going to be a larger growing tree. It's going to provide a lot of shade in its new environment. And it's going to be able to tolerate, it's the conditions of the site, and it's going to be able to be really happy in terms of the amount of sun it's going to get and the root growth. So the second thing that I did in terms of site assessment is I called Dig Safe. 811, before you dig, before a shovel goes in the ground, you got to call Dig Safe. So that is the yellow flags you see over here. That's your gas line. And it might be difficult to see from where you all are, but there's a bunch of spray paint all over the place, indicating the different underground utilities, so electric, water, sewer, etc. We want to make sure we're not planting over any utility lines. I get plenty of calls often. People get roots growing in their sewer lines, things like that. And so if we can pick a location where there's not going to be a lot of conflict with the tree and infrastructure, that's the best. So we got the okay from everybody. We're more than 10 feet away from the gas line, so this is a good location for this tree. What we've done already is started to pre-dig the hole. We don't want to get to pre-dig too much, because you can see at the moment there's the grow bag, and the grow bag is filled to a certain amount. That is not how deep the tree should go. So you want to dig and plant the tree up to the root flare, which will require some unburying from inside the grow bag. And then you'll want to be about 2 to 3 times the width for the hole of your grow bag. And that way make sure you can kind of splay out your roots, give it enough space to grow, give it enough, ability to kind of embed itself without coddling it too much. So we did start getting that going. So I think the next best thing for me to do is going to be to kind of cut the grow bag so you can all see what we're working with. All right, so I did start to do it a little bit. You want to keep the root ball, which is your ball of soil here, as intact as much as you can. But you do want to find your girdling roots and ungirdle them. So if your roots are wrapping around each other or around the tree itself, you want to try to help it out and fix that now while it's easily accessible. And you want to unbury that root flare. So the first thing I saw when I had looked at the tree here is I had seen this bump and some roots coming out. And so at an initial glance, you might think, okay, I have a bump here, the tree trunk's starting to widen. This is my root flare. This, in this situation, is not the case. It looks like there was either a little bit of damage to the tree trunk, or the tree was grafted at one point, and it started to grow an advantageous root here, which is what it's trying to do is it notices something's up with the tree. It does, it's trying to overcompensate. Trees don't heal, they seal. So it's trying to seal itself over here and kind of sprout out some roots to help itself. So what we'll do is we'll want to cut those, making a proper pruning cut, and then find our actual root flare, which is just a tad lower. If you can notice where the trunk is wet and brown, where the soil was packed up against it, we've got probably 3 inches worth of soil that was packed up against the tree. So if you had planted this tree at that depth thinking that this was where the proper root flare was located, what would likely happen is the tree would end up getting some sort of trunk rot, root rot, and it would end up not doing well and probably dying after a few years. If it does fight it for a little bit, it will, makes it hard, not as stable, less susceptible, or more susceptible to wind throw. We never want our trees to look like telephone poles sticking out of the ground. You want to see that nice, healthy flare from the roots going into the ground. And you want to be careful because these little fibrous roots are very fragile. So we certainly don't want to damage those. And it does seem like we have found the root flare. This is certainly much, much shorter of a hole than that grow bag was. And that's why we never want to, we can get our hole started and pre-dig out some of the turf, but you never want to estimate about how much you think it is based on the grow bag size, because then when you start to unbury it and pull the soil back from the root flare, you find you overdug. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut back some of these extra advantageous roots, and then we will measure how deep we need to go. So I got a nice pair here of bypass pruners. I find these are the best ones. They're called bypass because you have your pruning blade and you have the back end of it here. And when you go to prune it, your pruning blade bypasses the other area. And this is nice because you can line up your pruning blade with the part of the tree that you want to cut at. You don't ever want to cut in too close to the tree so your cut is made flat with the trunk. That's called a flush cut. That can open up the tree for damages, infections, and disease. You want to leave just the little collar from your cut, whether it's from the trunk or from a branch or from your roots. And with these two, you want to do one nice clean cut. Otherwise, you'll get some pulling, whether it's on your branches or on your roots. That peeling can also open up for disease or for fungus pathogens. So I'm just going to clip some of these away. So we've got, what looks to be probably between 8 and 12 inches worth of the trunk of the root ball that'll need to go in the ground. So we will dig out the rest of that. And when you're digging, you want to make your hole look almost like a bowl. A cup isn't going to be great in this situation because you're going to have too deep of a hole. Where when you have that nice saucer shape, it's going to be just what the tree is looking for. I'm also going to score up the sides a little bit of the hole here, just to allow the roots, those really fine fibrous roots, give them kind of a path where they can start making their way into the soil. I'm going to use my shovel here just to make sure my hole seems pretty level. Alright, so now's the fun part, and that's getting the tree into the ground. So I already made that one little cut on the root, or on the grow bag here. We've Sometimes with the grow bags, they're not as bad as ball and burlap, where you get the burlap and the wire bags. The grow bags, sometimes the roots will start to wrap around the side of the grow bag. This is where you want to kind of try and correct those if you can. Otherwise, the roots will continue to circle. They can choke themselves out. They're not going to do as well. They're going to impede the structural ability of the tree to hold itself up, and you may lose your tree. So as best as we can, without losing your root ball, we're going to pull that bag off. Kind of give those roots a good look over, make sure that they're doing all right. I see a nice big structural root right here, which is wonderful. And then supporting the tree, a nice grow bag isn't as heavy as the ball and burlap. We can drop it in. So now that the tree's in, we want to make sure of a couple of things. We want to make sure the tree's straight, and that, especially from a landscaping point of view, we want to make sure what we're looking at has the aesthetic point of view that we're looking for. We're not turning the tree once all the dirt goes in the hole. That's it. The tree's where it is. So we want to make sure, is this tree growing in the most optimal way? So looking at it from this angle, I'm going to say no. Your angle may be a little different. And we also want to make sure at this point too that we're not too deep. If we are too deep, we've got so much backfill here. We can throw some back in. That's not a problem at all. So first thing I'm going to do, make sure my hole isn't too deep. I mean, it does seem a little, so we'll probably throw some soil back in, and then we can twist the tree. Yes, so the process for that is you will want to cut the burlap, the wire basket off, and then you will want to get at the roots by cutting the burlap. The burlap is biodegradable. I prefer to remove everything. My thought is if it didn't come from outside, we're not leaving it outside. Some people do leave the burlap on, not necessarily saying that that's a wrong choice. It's just not my preference. And then I tend to find, because I find ball and burlap trees tend to be a little bit older, they might have some more established girdled roots, and you really got to be meticulous. And that's sometimes where we run into issues, because people are very, plant the tree, move on, let's get to the next one. And as I mentioned before, trees are an investment. And what's the point if you're going to rush in, rush out, and you're planting all your trees wrong? We'll be back out here again in 5 years doing this all over. Seems to me like the tree has got a good level to the ground here. Here's your root flare popping out. Looks great. And now we can kind of take a look at it from all over. It is chasing the sun a little bit, so we know that the sun is going to rise in the east. It's going to set over there in the west. And we're going to probably look at it from this way, coming into library. So I think, personally, from an aesthetic standpoint, the way the tree opens up this way, I'd want to see that from the road. So in my mind, angle is going to be the nicest angle. And I do see that there is a little bit of a lean going up this way. When we're looking at making sure the tree is planted in the hole straight, we're going to want to look at probably about 4 feet up and make sure that it's straight there, because it can figure itself out over time. It learns its new environment. It's going to start chasing the sun. The main purpose is making sure your trunk is straight. To me, it seems like it is leaning a little bit back. We do want it to go a little bit this way. So we'll backfill it a little bit on that side. I have a few stakes. Sometimes you need to stake trees, sometimes you don't. I think this one might benefit from a little stake to pull it forward. But I think otherwise, we've got ourselves a lovely tree in the ground. And now, all we got to do is backfill. We do Occasionally you can add soil amendments. There's an amendment called biochar. It's similar to a mulch type item. You can add that into the hole with your trees. I know Northampton does. I don't. It's not something I'm against, and it's something I want to look more into if it's worth investing in. And then we do have plenty of mulch that we're going to put over. The first 2 growing years are the most important. The tree is going to need to establish itself. It's going to need plenty of water. The 2 years here are going to be critical for its survival. So the mulch, it's going to provide the tree with a healthy buffer from the lawnmowers, so that way we're not whacking up the side of the tree. And then it's also going to help keep the soil moist, especially, I know times right now we're in a drought, so it's going to really need that. So you want to water up until about the first frost of the year, which it's so funky. I know a day like today, it was 36 this morning when I got up, and Halloween's going to be 80 degrees. So I always say if you're unsure that it's good to go into around the end of November. I do have a water bag that I will provide the tree with as well, so that way when I come back around it's easy to water it. And what we want to do with our mulch, and there's a big mistake that I constantly see, we want to leave about 3-4 inches from the trunk. I see, we call them in the industry mulch volcanoes, where you're volcanoing your mulch all the way up the tree. That's going to do the same thing if we leave the tree unburied and it's covered, or leave the tree buried and it's covered in soil. It's going to rot your tree's going to kick over, it's not going to be happy. So we can certainly go a little closer than I did, but we don't want to get too close. We want to create a nice bowl. Just give that some love and spread it around evenly. So this is a bark mulch, it's a fairly decent mulch. As the bark decomposes, it's going to put some nutrients back in the soil. They do make some mulches that have other kind of nutrients in it, like phosphorus and nitrogen. I say they're not always the greatest to start off with. You don't want to overwhelm your new tree, and it may not need that, so you may be almost over providing it with things it doesn't quite need, and you don't want it to become reliant on you giving it that. Otherwise it won't get it quite for itself. So I think typically bark mulch is a common one because it's fairly cheap, it's easy to get. And there's not really much of an issue with that. And we've got a tree.
Oh, see those trees in the midsummer's breeze. Yeah, we're happy to save the earth.